Hey y'all, it's the Plant Ninja, and today's video is going to be about designing your planters. As you can see here, I have got the sun like directly on the side of my face here, so I'll be squinting the whole time. But I love the morning sun in my garden. I love the birds. I love just the way the light shines at this time of day. So I got motivated to come out and get this film going. And so again, today's video is about designing your planter. I'm currently in zone 8B. It's March 19th. And so we are pretty safe from any more hard freezes or anything like that. And so do keep that in mind. You may be in a lower zone where it's a lot cooler right now, and you may still not be out of the woods when it comes to freezes. So don't put anything out just yet until you're free and clear. And so a couple of things I wanted to really touch base on today in today's video. Number one is just sort of my aesthetic, and when I design a planter, the height I'm going for, the width I'm going for, and what I'm sort of looking for in terms of grouping plants together in a planter. I also have several plants that I've just single plant options that I've put in a planter as well. So I will share some of my design points. It's not the end all be all. Everybody's got a bit of a different aesthetic. So feel free to use these ideas so that when you go to the garden center, you're not just buying all the pretty things and you don't have a plan, and then you put it all together and didn't quite work out the way you wanted it to. So, and then I'll also briefly touch on just some of the other things you may need when putting a planter together, potting soil, what to look for, and then maybe just also some fertilizer. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. So as you can see here with this planter, it's very tall and relatively narrow in terms of width compared to height. So tall and narrow planter, roughly 30 inches in height. The plant that's currently in it is about 10 inches in height. And so this plant is about a third of the height of the planter. And so my particular aesthetic, I prefer, again, 1/3 to 2/3 for the plant to be 1/3 to 2/3 of the height of the planter itself, and that usually gives me a good scale or look that I'm going for. This particular plant is called a blue chalk stick. It's a type of succulent, and it does relatively well in the sun, and so this spot gets lots of morning sun and lots of afternoon shade, so I think it'll be pretty happy here. Again, this is a single plant option, and I really like this particular planter because all of this here is just air. They actually have a built-in shelf so that I can set the actual pot that the plant is in on top of that. It does have a saucer, and that's something else you're going to want to keep in mind. If you've got a planter on a patio or something like that and you don't want to stain underneath, you do a little bit better with the saucer. I mean, still you can clearly get a lot of water run over. But from a drainage standpoint, you want a hole at the bottom of your planter, and you definitely would ideally want something to catch that excess water that drains from that hole. And then also you want to not stain your surface underneath. So if you're really overwatering this, you're going to probably get a little stain, but if you're pretty reasonable about watering, where you're not getting a ton of excess water that flows out, this will probably save you from staining your patio or your concrete. All right, so here we have a multi-plant planting, and I've got actually 4 different types of plants in here, okay? But they follow that mantra that we hear all the time of a thriller, which is usually a tall, kind of architecturally interesting plant, a filler, which is usually something that really kind of has a mounding habit and spreads a bit, and then we've got a spiller, which is usually something that trails down. And I've got 2 spillers in here, one Asian Jasmine and the other one Bacopa. And so when I designed this, I did use those 3 elements, but I wanted to make sure I got the heights right. And so this is again a relatively tall but narrow planter. It's about 22 inches in height. Currently, this particular plant is about 20 inches, so it's almost as tall as the planter, but I think we're getting away with it because of all the other plants that are around it. Now, these just got planted and they're gonna really fill out quite a bit. And so I already like how it looks. If I do need to prune it, because sometimes these can get quite tall, usually can tolerate a little bit of trimming to kind of keep it at a manageable or more aesthetically pleasing height. So what the plants that I have in here, this is an African iris, kind of like I'll have another one in this video. This is a super cow, so it's a type of petunia mix that is supposed to sort of be a little bit easier in terms of deadheading. It kind of deadheads itself a little bit. You still have to come out here and pull off some of the blooms. And I believe this color is Bordeaux, called Bordeaux. And then I have Bacopa, which it comes in different colors, but this particular one has little white flowers. And I've stuck one plant on either side here. And then I also have this Sunset or Summerset Asian Jasmine. I can't remember exactly the name, but this will be trailing nicely. And I often have to come out. I mean, this is all of these plants are very sun tolerant, and that's why I picked them for this spot, because it's south facing. This Asian Jasmine, it goes nuts. And so I do have to come out probably about once a month and just kind of trim it because it just shoots out everywhere. So I have, again, four different types of plants, but I have 5 plants total in here. And when I planted this, I put the African iris all the way in the back. It's like nudged right to the back, because you'll have to sort of snuggle these in right next to each other to really kind of get it to fill out. And so that's the other thing I would tell you, is that you can really put a lot of plants in a planter. It'll be fine. Can you overdo it? I'm sure you can, but I haven't yet. And so don't be afraid to make sure you're just sticking those right next to each other, and they'll kind of fill out where they want to. So as a side note, I wanted to share a little bit about this particular planter. It is a self-watering planter that has an insert. And this insert contains a tray that you fill with some sort of water-loving media that actually pulls water up from the reservoir beneath it to the soil above it, therefore watering your plants via capillary action. In this particular instance, I'm using Turfus. It also has a water gauge that lets you know when it's time to water again. All right, so here I have two actually flanking my front door, very tall and narrow planters. These are roughly about 22 to 24 inches tall. And I've really made them exactly the same, but I've got a thriller here. I believe this is called a blue dart juncus. I don't know if I'm saying that right, juncus. And then I have my filler, which is another type of super cow, and these blossoms are so pretty. This is called Autumn Sunset, I think. I'll make sure I put the correct name in here. And then I have just one type of spiller, and that's that Asian Jasmine I was telling you about, that particular variety of Asian Jasmine I was telling you about. But I just love how this is, it's tall. It provides some height that you need to kind of offset this height. Currently this is about 18 inches tall, but I mean, it really doesn't look too tall for the planters. So again, and I think you can get away with that because it's filled out. Now, something to consider, if you're like, I don't want to deal with all these flowers, you could probably just do a single planting of this blue dart juncus or whatever it is, but make sure you have enough to really kind of fill the planter, and I bet it would just be lovely. Just very simple, maybe a little bit more of a modern aesthetic. And so when I did plant these, so this is west facing, so whatever I put here has to really be able to take the heat of the Texas afternoon sun. And so petunias are great at that Vinca would be another awesome option. But all of these plants should be able to handle that just fine. And so again, I don't think I've mentioned this in the video until now, but get the right plant for the right spot. There are just some things that don't do well in full sun, and you'll be so sad when they burn to a crisp, or you'll be out here making yourself crazy trying to water. And so this particular planter, again, has a big open space down here. And so the actual plants themselves are kind of, it has like a little bit of a lip where it just sets inside the planter, and just that's how it works. But the wind will get you, because this is obviously very top heavy. So just a thought, if you have these style planters and they're very light, like this is like some sort of wicker type of material, make sure that you put some bricks or some stone or something to just kind of make sure it gets weighed down and doesn't get thrown over in the wind. So here you can see I have a single plant in this planter, and this planter is roughly 12 inches tall to include the saucer. And this plant currently is about 11 inches tall. So the plant is almost as tall as the planter. And I think that really works for this particular planter because it's shorter. And so from a design perspective, I've noticed the shorter and kind of wider the planter, the taller you can get away with the plant inside. That's not always true with some of the taller, narrow planters. So you can go as tall as you want, as long as I think it fills out in terms of width. So if I had a really tall, like let's say I had, I don't know, like maybe a single stemmed plant in here, but there was like nothing around that plant. It was just like 11 inches tall, but then it didn't fill out the entire diameter. It would look a little odd. So if you're gonna go as tall as the planter, make sure you fill out the full breadth or width of the planter as well. And I think you'll get a better fit that way. Clearly, I mean, you can't put a super tall plant in here, probably mostly because it's not gonna do very well. There's just not enough room for the roots. Like here, I don't know that you could necessarily put a tree in here or something like that, but this fits really nicely. This is, by the way, this is a type of yucca. It's kind of got some sharp edges here, so I hope I don't stab my kids all summer long as they pass by this, but it's pretty, so Mama's gonna keep it. All right, so with this particular planter, this again is a very short and wide type of planter, and so you can really kind of get away, I think, with a taller plant. So this planter is about 20 inches in height, and this plant at its tallest is about 30 inches. So this plant is really taller than this planter, but I feel like you can get away with it because it really fills out the whole planter nicely. This, by the way, is a African iris. I think it's also called a bicolor iris. And it will bloom in the full sun. And this is a great option, especially these single plant options that don't do a lot of shedding. Consider these, like if you've got a pool or some sort of water feature you don't want things constantly shedding in, these are excellent options. Not very fussy. You water it per the instructions, and it's pretty user friendly. So if you're not wanting something real fussy, consider these single plant options that I've showed you. So I wanted to share some basics about how to pot a plant using this particular planting. The first thing you're going to need is a pot with good drainage holes. It could be one, it could be several, but definitely you want a pot that allows for moisture to seep away from the soil. You'll also need planting soil or potting mix, as well as whatever other substrate or media you're going to use in your pot. Also, of course, you'll need your plant and then also some fertilizer. So you'll notice here that I'm using some lava rock in here, and that's really serving two purposes. One, it makes the pot less heavy, And I don't really need this pot to be heavy. It's already heavy enough. It's a ceramic pot, not worried about the wind tipping it over. But also, this is sort of a cheaper substrate or media to use besides filling the entire planter up with potting soil. And so I fill about a third to half of the pot full of this lighter weight substrate. You don't have to use lava rock. You can use some sort of repurposed packing peanuts or something like that that will, again, facilitate or allow for drainage, but just lightens the weight of the pot. So next you're going to need a good potting soil. I know you may be thinking, dirt is dirt, so why should I get something more specific or more expensive? Well, good potting soil serves really three basic functions. Number one, it retains moisture and nutrients. This is usually done with some sort of pine bark or peat moss. Two, it aerates the soil. This is usually done with something like perlite or vermiculite. And three, it anchors the soil around the roots, providing enough weight for the soil to settle. And this is usually done with just other forms of substrate and topsoil. So some potting mixes also have added fertilizer, so do keep that in mind if you're planning on adding fertilizer later. So something else you should do to your plants before you add them to your pot, when you remove them from their temporary pot that they came in at the store, you want to agitate their roots. And so essentially you're just kind of breaking up that circular root pattern and allowing those roots, therefore, once you add them to the pot, to kind of spread out and not continue in that circular pattern. In terms of fertilizer, I usually keep it pretty simple by using a balanced slow release fertilizer. The slow release delivers the nutrients your plant need over a period of time while avoiding burning the plants too much because of the salts contained within the fertilizer. Osmocote's my go-to brand and has enough phosphorus to support a lot of the flowering plants that I have. And so here we have another relatively tall and it seems wide this way, but it's pretty narrow this way planter. And so I am going with the design aesthetics of 1/3 to 2/3 in terms of my plant height. And this is about a 30-inch tall planter, and this is about a 10-inch tall plant. Now it's going to get bigger, but for right now that's where it's at. Clearly, because of how wide it is, you see it doesn't quite look as filled out as it should, and it will fill out because you may not be able to see I got two smaller plants on either side. And so this will sort of be the thriller of my planter. This is chocolate mint, and it'll kind of be the spiller because it has a trailing habit. And then I have regular mint, and so it'll kind of fill out a little bit more on the other side here. So something else to consider, I mean, these mint plants are edible, and where you can get away with it, consider putting herbs or something like that, something you can actually eat within your planters. It brings a little interest, and then, you know, you've got some herbs in there and you can use it in the kitchen.